I meant something with a little more punch. No, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm not exactly set up for company as yet. So I see. Intrigued, Faith did a turn around the kitchen, laying the knife on the counter as she passed. A little more Spartan than I expected, even for you. This was how Hope would have looked if she'd lived. Tori couldn't get the thought out of her head. She would have looked just like this, deep blue eyes against clear white skin, hair the color of corn silk, slim and beautiful and alive. I don't need much. That always was the difference, one of them anyway, between us. You didn't need much. I needed everything. Did you ever get it? Faith arched a brow, then only smiled and leaned back on the counter. Oh, I'm still collecting. How does it feel to be back? I haven't been back long enough to know. Long enough to come to the door with a kitchen knife in your hand when someone pays a call. I'm not used to calls at 3 in the morning. I had a late date. I'm between husbands at the moment. You never did marry, did you? No. I swear I heard something about you being engaged at one time. I guess it didn't work out. The sense of failure, despair, betrayal wanted to come. No, Tori said, it didn't work out. I take it your marriages, 2 of them, weren't there? Didn't work out either. Faith smiled, and this time meant it. She preferred an even match. Grew into your teeth, I see. I don't want to take a bite out of you, Faith, and it seems pointless for you to take one out of me after all this time. I lost her, too. She was my sister. You never could remember that. She was your sister. She was my only friend. Something tried to stir inside her, but Faith blocked it off. You could have made new friends. You're right. There's nothing I can say to make up for it, to change things, to bring her back. Nothing I can say, nothing I can do. Then why come back? They never let me say goodbye. It's too late for goodbyes. You believe in fresh starts and second chances, Tori? Yes, I do. I don't, and I'll tell you why. She took a cigarette out of her purse, lighted it. After taking a drag, she waved it. Nobody wants to start over. Those who say they do are liars or delusional, but mostly liars. People just want to pick up where they left off, wherever things went wrong, and start off in a new direction without any of the baggage. Those who manage it are the lucky ones because somehow they're able to shrug off all those pesky weights like guilt and consequences. She took another drag, giving Tori a contemplative stare. You don't look all that lucky to me. You know what? Neither do you, and that's a surprise. Faith's mouth trembled open, then she shut it again and smiled thinly. Oh, I travel light and travel often. You just ask anyone. Looks like we've landed in the same place. Why don't we make the best of it? Long as you remember who got here first, we won't have a problem. You've never let me forget it. But right now, this is my house, and I'm tired. Then I'll see you around. She started out, trailing smoke. You sleep tight, Tori. Oh, and if staying out here all alone gives you the willies, I'd trade that knife in for a gun. She stopped, opened her purse, and lifted out a trim pearl-handled pistol. A woman just can't be too careful, can she? With a light laugh, she dropped the gun back into her bag, snapped it closed, then let the screen door slap behind her. Tori made herself stand in the doorway, even when the headlights blinded her. She stood there until the car reversed out of the lane, swung onto the road, and sped away. She locked the door, then went back in the kitchen for the flashlight and the knife. Part of her wanted to get into the car, drive into town, and knock on her uncle's door. But if she couldn't spend this first night in the house, it would be that much easier to avoid the next, and the next. She lay with her back to the wall, her eyes on the window until the dark softened and the first birds of morning woke. He had been afraid. When he'd crept so quietly to the window, he'd felt what he felt so rarely, a fist of fear squeezing at his gut. Tori Bodine, back where it all started. She was sleeping, curled on the floor like a gypsy, and he could see the curve of her cheek, the shape of her lips in the slant of moonlight. Something would have to be done. He'd known that, had begun to plan for it in his quiet and steady way. But what a jolt to see her here, to remember it all so vividly just by seeing her here. He'd been startled when she'd woken, coming out of sleep as fast and straight as an arrow from a bow. Even in the dark, he'd seen visions in her eyes. It had brought sweat to his face, to the palms of his hands. But there were plenty of shadows, plenty of shelter to slide into, cracks in the wall. He'd folded himself into one of the cracks and watched Faith arrive, the bright hair gleaming in the moonlight in such an interesting contrast to Tori's dark. Tori, who seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He'd known, of course, in that instant when they'd stood together, when their voices had mixed, where they would take him, where he would take them. It would be as it had been the first time, so long ago. It would be what he'd been trying to recapture for 18 long years. It would be perfect. She'd planned to be up early. When the knock at the front door woke her at 8, Tori wasn't certain if she were more irritated with herself or the new visitor. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she stumbled out of the bedroom, blinked at the sunlight, and fumbled with the lock. She gave Cade one bleary stare through the screen. Maybe I shouldn't be paying rent if the Lavells have decided to make this their home away from home. Sorry? Nothing. She gave the screen one half-hearted push that wasn't entirely an invitation, then turned away. I need coffee. I woke you. He stepped in to follow her into the kitchen. Farmers tend to think everyone's up at dawn. He stopped by the open door of the bedroom and swore. For Christ's sake, Tori, you don't even have a bed. I'm getting one today. Why didn't you stay with J.R. and Boots? Because I didn't want to. You prefer sleeping on the floor? What's this? He walked into the room, taking over, Tori thought, much as his sister had the night before, then came out holding the knife. It's my crochet hook. I've got a hell of an Afghan going. When he only stared at her, she hissed out a breath and stomped into the kitchen. I had a late night and I'm surly, so watch your step. Saying nothing, he slid the knife back into its slot in the block. While she measured out coffee and water, he set the plate he carried on the counter. What's that? Lila sent it over. She knew I was coming this way this morning. Cade peeled up a corner of the foil. Coffee cake. She said you had a taste for her sour cream coffee cake. Tori merely stared at it, shocking them both when her eyes filled. Before he could move, she held up a hand, kept it aloft like a shield as she turned away. Unable to resist, he ran a hand over her hair, then let it drop when she stepped quickly, deliberately out of reach. You tell her I appreciate it very much. She's well, is she? Why don't you come by and see for yourself? No, not for a while yet. I don't think for a little while yet. Steadier, she opened a cupboard and took down a cup. You gonna share? She glanced back over her shoulder. Her eyes were dry now and clear. He didn't look like a damn farmer, she thought. Oh, he was tanned and lean, and his hair streaked from the sun. His jeans were old and his shirt faded blue. There were sunglasses hooked carelessly by one earpiece in the breast pocket. What he looked like, she decided, was some Hollywood director's image of a young, prosperous Southern farmer who could ooze charm and sex appeal with one easy smile. She didn't trust images. I suppose I have to be polite. You could be rude and greedy, he said, but you'd feel terrible about it later. She had 4 cups, he noted, 4 saucers, all in solid, sensible white. She had an automatic coffee maker and no bed. Her shelves were already tidily lined, again in white. There wasn't a single chair in the house. Just what, he wondered, did such matters say about Tori Bodine? She took out another knife, then lifted her eyebrows at him as she measured a slice. He wagged his fingers until she widened it. Got an appetite this morning? She asked as she cut through. I've been smelling that all the way over here. He picked up the plates. Why don't we have this out on the front porch? I take my coffee black, he added, then walked out. Tori only sighed and poured 2 cups. He was sitting on the steps when she came out, resting his back against the top riser. She sat beside him, sipping her coffee and looking out over his fields. She'd missed this. The realization came in a backward slap of surprise that was more shock than pain. She'd missed mornings here, when the heat of the day had yet to smother the air, when the birds sang like miracles and the fields lay green and growing. She'd had precious mornings like that even as a child when she had sat on what had been a cracked concrete stoop, studied the coming day, and dreamed foolish dreams. It's a nice smile, he commented. Is it the cake or the company that tugged it out of you? It vanished like a ghost. Why were you coming this way this morning, Cade? I got fields to look after, crews to check. He broke off a corner of coffee cake. And I wanted another look at you. Why? To see if you were as pretty as I thought you were yesterday. She shook her head, took a bite of cake, and went straight back to Miss Lila's wonderful kitchen. It cheered her so much she smiled again, took another bite. Why, really? You did look a sight better yesterday, he said conversationally, but I have to take into account you didn't get much sleep on that floor. You make a fine cup of coffee, Miss Bodine. There's no reason you have to feel you need to check up on me. I'm fine here. I just need a couple of days to settle in. I'm not going to be here half the time anyway. Setting up the store is going to take most of my time. I imagine so. Have dinner with me tonight. What for? When he didn't answer, she turned her head. His eyes were amused, his lips faintly curved, and in that mild and friendly expression she saw something she'd successfully avoided for years, frank male interest. No, oh no. She lifted her cup, gulped down coffee. That was pretty definite. Let's make it tomorrow night. No, Cade, I'm sure that's very flattering, but I don't have the time or the inclination for any sort of a thing. He stretched out his long legs, crossed them at the ankles. We don't know what sort of a thing either of us has in mind at this stage. Me, I enjoy a meal now and again, and find I enjoy one more in good company. I don't date. Is that a religious obligation or a societal preference? It's a personal choice now. Because he looked to be settling in entirely too comfortably, she got to her feet. I'm sorry, but I have to get started on my day. I'm already behind schedule. He rose, watched her eyes grow wide and watchful when he shifted just an inch closer. Somebody roughed you up plenty, didn't they? Don't. That's just the point, Tori. Because he didn't care to have her flinch away from him, he eased back. I wouldn't. Thanks for the coffee. He walked to his truck, pausing to turn back when he'd opened the door. He gave her a good long stare, figuring it would do them both good for her to get used to it. I was wrong, he called out as he climbed in the cab. You're just as pretty today. She smiled before she could help herself, watched him grin before he backed out of the lane. Alone, she sat back down. Oh, hell, she muttered, and stuffed more cake into her mouth. 6. Independent small-town banks were a dying breed. Tori knew this because her uncle, who'd managed Progress Bank and Trust for 12 years, rarely failed to mention it. Even without the family connection, she would have chosen it for her business. It was just good politics. It sat on the east side of Market, 2 blocks down from her shop. That added convenience. The old red brick building had been carefully and lovingly preserved. That added charm. The Lavells had established it in 1853 and maintained a proprietary interest. There, she thought as she turned toward the front door, was the politics. If you wanted to do business successfully in Progress, South Carolina, you did business with the Lavells. It was a rare pie their fingers weren't dipped in. The interior of the bank had changed. She could remember visiting her grandmother and thinking the tellers worked in cages like exotic animals in the zoo. Now the lobby area was open, almost airy, and 4 tellers manned a long, high counter. They'd added a drive-through window in the back, and behind a waist-high wooden rail and gate, 2 employees sat at lovely old desks topped with sharp and efficient-looking computers. There were several nicely executed paintings of South Carolinian land and seascapes adorning the walls. Someone, she mused, had figured out how to modernize without deleting the soul. She wondered if she could gently nudge her uncle into one of the paintings or wall hangings she'd soon have for sale. Tori Bodine, is that you? With a little jolt, Tori turned her attention to the woman behind the rail. She worked up a smile as she tried to place the face and came up blank. Yes, hello. Well, it's just so nice to see you again, and all grown up, too. The woman was tiny, could barely have topped 5 feet. She came through the gate, held out both hands. Always knew you'd be a pretty thing. You won't remember me. It felt so rude not to in the face of such sincere delight. For a moment, Tori was tempted to use the connection, grab onto a name, but she couldn't break a vow over something so trivial. I'm sorry. Now, there's no need for that. You were just a bit of a thing last I saw you. I'm Betsy Gluck. Your grandma trained me when I was just out of high school. I remember how you used to come in now and again and sit quiet as a mouse. You gave me lollipops. It was such a relief to remember, to have that quick, sweet taste of cherry on her tongue. Why, imagine you remembering that after all this time. Betsy's green eyes sparkled as she gave Tori's hands a squeeze. Now you're here to see J.R. If he's busy, I can just... Don't be silly. I've got instructions to take you straight into his office. She wrapped an arm around Tori's waist as she led her through the gate. She'd have to get used to this, Tori reminded herself, to being touched, handled. She couldn't be a stranger here. It must be so exciting opening a store all your own. I just can't wait to come shopping. I bet Miss Mooney's just so proud she could pop. Betsy rapped on a door at the end of a short hall. J.R., your niece is here to see you. The door swung open, and J.R. Mooney filled it. The size of him always astonished Tori. How this big, brawny man had come from her grandmother was one of life's mysteries. There she is! His voice was as big as the rest of him and boomed out as he made his grab. Tori was braced for it and still lost her breath when he scooped her off her feet into his wild, grisly hug. And as always, the surprise came as her toes left the ground that the rib-cracking embrace made her laugh. Uncle Jimmy! Tori pressed her face into his bull's neck and finally felt home. J.R., you're going to snap that girl like a twig. She's little, J.R. winked at Betsy, but she's wiry. You make sure we got us a few minutes quiet in here, won't you, Betsy? Don't you worry. Welcome home, Tori, Betsy added and closed the door. Here now, you sit down. You want anything, Coca-Cola? No, nothing, I'm fine. She didn't sit, but lifted her hands, then dropped them. I should have come to see you yesterday. Don't you fret about that, you're here now. J.R. leaned back on his desk, a man of 6'2" and a muscled 250. His ginger-colored hair hadn't faded with age, but there were thin wires of silver woven through the mass of it. The brush mustache that added a bit of dash to his round face had grown in pure silver, as had his woolly, caterpillar eyebrows. His eyes were more blue than gray and had always seemed so kind to Tori. Abruptly he grinned, big as the moon. Girl, you look like City. Just as pretty and polished as a TV star. Boots is going to love showing you off. He laughed at Tori's automatic wince. Oh, now, you'll indulge her a bit, won't you? She never did have that daughter she pined for, and Wade just won't cooperate and get married to give her little granddaughters to dress up. She tries to put a lace pinafore on me, we're going to have trouble. I'll go see her, Uncle Jimmy. I need to get settled first, get into the shop and roll up my sleeves. I've got stock and supplies coming in over the next few days. Ready to work, are you? Eager. I've wanted to take this step a long time. I hope the Progress Bank and Trust has room for another account. We've always got room for more money. I'll set you up myself, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Honey, I heard you rented the old house. Does Lissy Fraser hold the record for the biggest mouth in Progress these days? She runs neck and neck with a few others. Now, I don't mean to crowd you or anything like that, but Cade Lavelle wouldn't hold you to that lease if you wanted to change your mind. Boots and I wish you'd come stay with us. We got room, God knows. I appreciate that, Uncle Jimmy. No, hold on. Don't say but just yet. You're a grown woman. I got eyes. I can see that. You've been on your own some years now. But I can't say as I like the idea of you living out there, not in that house. I don't see how it can be good for you. Good or not, it feels necessary. He beat me in that house. When J.R. closed his eyes, Tori stepped closer. Uncle Jimmy, I don't say that to hurt you. I should have done something about it. I should have got you out of there, away from him. Should have got you both out. Mama wouldn't go. She spoke gently now because he seemed to need it. You know that. I didn't know how bad it was, not then. I didn't look hard enough. But I know now, and I don't like to think about you being out there, remembering all that. I remember it wherever I am. Staying there, well, that proves to me I can face it. I can live with it. I'm not afraid of him anymore. I won't let myself be. Why don't you come on to the house just for a few days then? See how you settle. He only sighed when she shook her head. It's my plight to be surrounded by stubborn women. Well, sit down so I can do this paperwork and take your money. At noon, the bells of the Baptist church chimed the hour. Tori stepped back, wiped the sweat off her face. Her display window sparkled like a diamond. She'd carted boxes in from her car and stacked them in the storeroom. She'd measured for shelving, for counters, and made a list of demands and requirements she intended to take down to the realtor. She was working on the second list, one she would take to the hardware store, when someone tapped on the cracked glass of the shop door. She studied the spare man in workman's clothes as she approached. Dark hair, well cut, a smooth, handsome face with an easy, crooked smile. Sunglasses hid his eyes. I'm sorry, I'm not open, she said as she opened the door. Looks like you could use a carpenter. He tapped his finger at the crack again. And a glass man. How's it going, Tori? He took off his sunglasses, revealing dark, intense eyes and a tiny hook-shaped scar just under the right one. Dwight Frazier. I didn't recognize you. A few inches taller, several pounds lighter than the last time you saw me. Thought I should come by, welcome you as mayor, and shift hats to see if there's anything Frazier Construction can do for you. Mind if I come in a minute? Oh, sure. She stepped back. Nothing much to see just now. It's a good space. He moved well, she noted, not at all like the awkward, chubby boy he'd been. The braces were gone, and so was the ruthless buzz cut his father had insisted on. He looked fit, and he looked prosperous. No, she thought, she wouldn't have recognized him. It's a solid building, he continued, with a strong foundation, and the roof's sound. He turned back, flashing the smile that had helped his orthodontist buy a cabin cruiser. I should know, we put it on 2 years back. Then I'll know who to come after if it leaks. He laughed and hooked his sunglasses in the collar of his T-shirt. Frazier builds to last. You're going to want counters, shelves, displays. Yes, I was just measuring. I can send you a good carpenter at a fair rate. It was smart and, again, political to use local labor, if, she thought, local labor met her budget. Well, your idea of a fair rate and mine might not connect. His grin was lightning and full of charm. Tell you what, let me get some things out of my truck. You can tell me what you've got in mind, and I'll give you an estimate. We'll see if we can make them connect. He was aware she was measuring him even as he measured her walls. He was used to it. As a boy, his father had measured him and had forever found him just short of the mark. Dwight Frazier, ex-Marine, avid hunter, town councilman, and founder of Frazier Construction, had high standards for the fruit of his loins. His disappointment when that fruit had turned out undersized and soft had been keen. Young Dwight Jr. had never been allowed to forget it. The truth was, Dwight mused as he scribbled numbers on his clipboard, he had been short of the mark. Short, fat, clumsy, he'd been a prime candidate for jokes and sneers and his father's tight-lipped disappointment. Worse, he'd had a brain. As a boy, there was no more deadly combination than a pudgy body, clumsy feet, and a sharp brain. He'd been the darling of his teachers, which meant he might as well have painted a kick-my-ass sign on his back. His mother had struggled to make up for it the best way she knew how, by shoving food in his face. There was nothing like a box of ho-hos in his dear mama's thinking to make all right with the world again. His salvation had been Cade and Wade. Why they'd befriended him had never made full sense to Dwight. Class had been part of it. They had come from 3 of the town's most prominent families. For that he had been and continued to be grateful. Perhaps there was still a tiny splinter of resentment in his gut over the whims of fate that had made those 2 tall, handsome, and agile, while he'd been plump, plain, and awkward. But he'd made up for it, in spades. I started running when I was 14. He said it casually as he drew out his measuring tape again. Excuse me? You're wondering. He crouched, noted on his pad again. Got sick of being the fat kid and decided to do something about it. Took off 12 pounds of blubber in a couple of months. First few times I ran, I did it at night when no one could see me. I got sick as 3 dogs. Stopped eating the cupcakes and candy bars and chips my mother packed in my lunch every day. Thought I'd starve to death. He rose, flashed his grin again. First year of high school, I started going out to the track at night, running there. I was still overweight, still slow, but I didn't puke up dinner anymore. Seems that Coach Heister used to come out there at night, too, in his Chevy sedan in the company of another man's wife. I won't mention who, as the lady remains married and is the proud grandmother of 3 now. Hold this end for me, sugar. Fascinated, Tori took the end of the measuring tape as Dwight walked backward to span the projected counter area. Now, it so happened that on one of our mutual visits to the Progress High School track, I got an eyeful of the coach and the future grandmother of 3. It was, you can imagine, a rather awkward moment for all parties involved, to say the least. And the least said the better, which is what Coach suggested to me as he clamped his hands around my throat. I had to agree. However, being a fair man, or perhaps just a suspicious one, he offered me a token in return. If I continued to train and could take off another 10 pounds, he'd give me a place on the track team come spring. This was our tacit agreement, that I would forget the incident and that he would refrain from killing me and burying my body in a shallow grave. Seemed to work for everyone. Sure worked for me. I took off the weight and shocked everyone, including myself, by not only making the team but blowing the competition to hell in the 50 and 100-yard dash. I was a hell of a sprinter, it turned out. I won the All-Star Trophy 3 years running and the love of pretty Lissy Harlow. She warmed to him, one outsider to another. That's a nice story. Happy endings. I think I can help you get your own here in your shop. Why don't I buy you lunch and we'll talk about it? I don't... She broke off as the door opened behind her. Don't tell me you're hiring this two-bit hustler. Wade strolled in, swung an arm around Tori's shoulder. Thank God I got here in time. This puppy doctor here doesn't know a damn thing about building. Go give a poodle an enema, Wade. I'm about to take your pretty cousin and my potential client to lunch. Then I'll just have to come along and protect her interests. I need shells more than I need a sandwich. I'll see you get both. Dwight winked at her. Come on, sugar, and bring this dead weight along with you. She took 30 minutes and enjoyed herself more than she'd expected. It was a pleasure to see the adult friendship between Dwight and Wade that had its roots in the boys she remembered. It made her miss Hope. It was easy enough for a woman who was rarely comfortable around men to relax when one was her cousin and the other tidily married. So tidily, Dwight was showing off pictures of his son before the sandwiches were served. Tori would have made the appropriate and expected noises in any case, but the truth was the little boy was seriously adorable, with Lissy's pretty face and Dwight's snapping eyes. And, she decided as she headed off to do errands, it had been constructive as well as easy. Not only did Dwight understand what she wanted, but he improved on her basic layout, and the estimate slipped comfortably into her budget. Or did after she wheedled, refused, questioned, and pushed. And wiping imaginary sweat from his brow, he promised the work would be done before the middle of May. Satisfied, she went out and bought a bed. She really meant to pick up just the mattress and box spring. Years of frugality had never permitted her to impulse buy, and it was rare, very rare, for her to experience the deep-seated desire to own something. The minute she saw it, she was hooked. She walked away from it twice and back again. The price wasn't out of line, but she didn't need a lovely, classic iron bed with slim, smooth posts to frame both head and foot of the mattress. Yes, it was practical, but it wasn't necessary. A sturdy bed frame and a good solid mattress set, that was all she required. All she was going to do was sleep in it, for goodness sake. She argued with herself even as she pulled out her credit card, as she drove to the loading dock, as she drove home. Then she was too busy hauling and cursing and tugging to waste time arguing. Standing between rows of newly cultivated cotton, Cade watched her struggle for 10 minutes. Then he did some cursing of his own, marched to his truck, and drove down to her lane. He didn't slam the door after he climbed out, but he wanted to. You forgot your magic bracelets. She was out of breath. Some stray wisps of hair had escaped her braid and were plastered to her face, but she had the huge and heavy box halfway up the porch steps. She straightened, tried not to pant. What? You can't be Wonder Woman without your magic bracelets. I'll get this end. I don't need any help. Stop being an ass and get the door. She stomped over, yanked the door open. Are you always here? He took off his sunglasses, tossed them aside. It was a habit that cost him a pair on the average of 2 a month. You see that field over there? It's mine. Now, move aside while I get this up there. What the hell kind of bed is this? Iron, she said with some satisfaction when she noted he had to put his back into it. Figures. We need to angle it up through the door. I knew that. She planted her feet, crouched, and took the weight of her end. There was a lot of muttering, a great deal of finessing, and a scraped knuckle on her end, but they got it through. She continued to walk backward, forced to trust him as he directed her right or left until they muscled it into the bedroom. Thank you. Her arms felt like rubber. I can manage from here. Got any tools? Of course I have tools. Good. Get them. It'll save me from going for mine. Might as well set this up before we bring the rest in. In one irritable gesture, she pushed her sweaty hair back. I can do it. And you're almost contrary enough for me to let you. I am trapped by my superior breeding. He took her hand, examined the broken skin, and kissed it lightly before she could snatch it free. You can put something on that while I do this. She considered insulting him, ordering him out, even kicking him out, and decided every option was a waste of time. She got the tools. He admired the seriously efficient black toolbox. Aren't you just prepared for everything? You probably don't know pliers from a wrench. Obviously amused, he pulled out a pair of needle-nose pliers. Scissors, right? When the breath she huffed out ended on a laugh, he got to work on the heavy-duty staples plugged into the box. Go put something on that knuckle. It's all right. He didn't bother to look at her or change the tone of his voice, but there was the light and tempered steel of command. Put something on it. Then why don't you go fix us something cold to drink? Look, Cade, I'm not the little woman. He glanced up now, measured her with one cool look. You're little, and you're a woman, and I've got the scissors. I don't suppose my suggesting just where you might shove those pliers would wipe that smile off your face. I don't suppose telling you you're sexy when you're frazzled would convince you to christen this bed with me once we set it up. Jesus, was all she said as she strode out of the room. She left him alone. She could hear the clatter and the occasional oath as she hauled in groceries, put them away, brewed tea. He had long hands, she mused, elegant pianist's fingers that contrasted with the hard, calloused palms. She was sure he knew how to plant and tend and harvest. He'd been raised to do so. But everyday chores, no, that was a different matter. Since she didn't expect he'd put together a single bed frame in his own privileged life, she imagined she'd walk in on complete chaos, and she was determined to give him plenty of time to make a mess of things. She hooked up her new kitchen phone, put away her new dishcloths, and lazily sliced lemons for the tea. Satisfied he'd had enough time to mortify himself, she poured 2 glasses over ice and strolled into the bedroom with them. He was just turning the last bolt. Her eyes lit up, and the quick little sound she made was one of sheer feminine delight. Oh, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. I knew it would be. Without thinking, she shoved the glasses into his hand so she could run hers over the iron. His first reaction was amusement, then a cool satisfaction. Just as he started to sip the tea, she stepped into the center of the frame and ran her fingertips up the iron rungs. And his reaction turned to sheer lust, so basic, so strong, he took one deliberate step in retreat. He could imagine, perfectly, wrapping her fingers around those posts, holding them there as he thrust into her. One hard, long stroke after another, while those long-lidded witch eyes of hers went to smoke. It's sturdy. She gave the headboard a little shake, and his stomach pitched and knotted. Damn well better be. You did a good job, and I was rude. Thank you, and I'm sorry. You're welcome, and forget it. He handed her the glass, then reached up to tug the chain of the ceiling fan. It's warm in here. He wanted to bite that spot just under her left ear, where her jaw began its curve. Because his voice was clipped, she suffered another pang of guilt. I really was rude, Cade. I'm not very good with people. Not good with people, and you're going to open a shop where you'll deal with them every day? That's customers, she said. I'm very good with customers. I'm positively gracious with customers. So, he moved in until he stood just on the other side of the frame. If I buy something from you, you'll be friendly. She didn't have to read his thoughts when she could read his eyes. Not that friendly. Nimbly, she sidestepped him and moved out of the room. I could be a very good customer. You're trying to frazzle me again. I am frazzling you again. Tori. He laid a hand on her shoulder. Stop that, he said mildly when she stiffened. He set his glass on the floor, then turned her to face him. There, that didn't hurt a bit, did it? He had gentle hands. It had been a long time, a very long time, since she'd felt a gentle touch from a man. I'm not interested in flirtations. I am, but we can compromise for now. Let's try to be friends. I'm not a good friend. I am. Now why don't we get the rest of your bed in here so you can get a decent night's sleep tonight? She let him get nearly to the door. She told herself she wouldn't speak of it. Not to him, not to anyone, until she was ready. Until she was strong and she was sure. But it was bubbling up inside her. Cade, you never asked. Not then, not now. You've never once asked how I knew. Her palms went damp as he turned, so she clutched them to her elbows. You've never asked how I knew where to find her, how I knew what had happened. I didn't have to ask. Her words rushed out now, popping like overwound springs. Some people think I was with her, even though I said I wasn't, that I ran away and left her, that I just left her. That's not what I think. And the ones who believed me, believed that I saw the way I said I did, they stepped back from me, kept their children away from me. They stopped looking me in the eye. I looked you in the eye, Tori, then and now. She had to take a breath to settle herself. Why? If you can believe I have that inside me, why didn't you step back? Why are you coming around here now? Do you expect me to tell you the future? Because I can't. Or give you some stock tips? Because I won't. Her face was flushed, he noted, her eyes dark and alive with ripe and ready emotions. One of those emotions, one that prickled through the surface of all the others, was anger. He wouldn't play to it, or to what he believed were her expectations. I prefer living each day as it comes, thanks all the same, and I've got a broker to take care of my portfolio. Did it ever occur to you that I'm coming around here now because I like the look of you? No. Then you are the first and only female without vanity I've had occasion to meet. Wouldn't hurt to get yourself some. Now, he cocked his head, do you want to get this mattress in here or astound and amaze me by telling me what I had for lunch this afternoon? Her mouth opened as he walked out the door. Had he actually made a joke about it? People made fun of her or rolled their eyes or backed cautiously away. Some came begging for her to solve all their problems and unhappiness, but no one, in her experience, made a casual joke. She rolled the tension out of her shoulders, then walked outside to help him carry in the mattress. They worked in silence now, her stewing and his mind elsewhere. When the bed was in place, Cade polished off his tea, took the glass into the kitchen, then headed out. You should be able to handle it from here. I'm a bit behind schedule. Oh, no, you don't, she thought, and rushed after him. I appreciate the help, I really do. Whether it was impulse or annoyance, she followed it and wrapped her fingers around his arm until he stopped and glanced down. Well, then, you just think of me when you're sliding off to dreamland tonight. I know it cost you some time. Oh, you said something about lunch? Baffled, he shook his head. Lunch? It was just enough. Yes, your lunch today. Half a ham sandwich with Swiss and brown mustard. You gave the other half to that skinny black dog who comes begging in the fields when he sees you. She smiled now and stepped away. You ought to be ready for supper soon. He pondered a minute, then decided to go with instinct. Tori, why don't you come back here and tell me what I'm thinking now? She felt something like a laugh rumble in her chest. I believe I'll just let you keep that to yourself. She let the screen door slam behind her. 7. It was the flowers, Margaret always thought, that kept her sane. When she tended her flowers, they never talked back, never told her she didn't understand, never yanked up their roots and stalked away in a huff. She could prune away the wild parts, those sudden growth sprigs that thought they could go their own way until the plant was shaped as she intended for it to be shaped. She'd have been much better off, she imagined, if she'd stayed a spinster and had raised peonies instead of children. Children broke hearts just by being children. But marriage had been expected of her. She had done, for as long as she could remember, what had been expected of her. Occasionally she did a little more, but rarely, very rarely, did she do less. And she had loved her husband, for surely that had been expected as well. Jasper Lavelle had been a handsome young man when he'd come courting her. Oh, and he'd had charm as well, the same slow, sly grin she sometimes saw cruise across the face of the son they'd made together. He'd had a temper, but that had been exciting when she'd been young enough to find such things exciting. She recognized that same temper, the quick flash of it, in her daughter, the daughter who'd lived. He'd been big and strong, a dramatic kind of man with a loud laugh and hard hands. Perhaps that was why she saw so much of him and so little of herself in the children who'd been left to them. It angered her when she took stock how vague and blurred her imprint was on the clay of those lives she'd helped create. She had opted, sensibly she was sure, to concentrate on leaving her mark on Beau Rêve instead. There her touch, her vision, ran deep as the roots of the old oaks that lined the drive. And that, more than son or daughter, had become her pride. If Hope had lived, it would have been different. She snipped off the faded head of a dianthus without sentiment or regret for the loss of the once fragrant bloom. If Hope had lived, she would have reflected and realized all the hopes and dreams a mother instilled in a daughter. She would have given a new luster to the polish of the Lavelle name. Jasper would have stayed strong and stayed steady and never have disgraced himself with loose women and casual scandal. He would never have strayed from the path they had both started on and left his wife to rub the smudges from the name they shared. But in the end, Jasper had been a storm, and when he hadn't been crashing, he'd been brewing. Life with him had been a series of events, she supposed. His last had been the poor taste to suffer a fatal heart attack in the bed of his mistress. The fact that the woman had had the sense and the dignity to step back while the incident was hushed up sat in Margaret's craw like a jagged bone. Still, all said and done, it was so much easier to be his widow than it had been to be his wife. She couldn't say why he was so much on her mind just now, on this blissfully cool morning when the dew lay wet kisses on her blossoms and the sky was the soft and gentle blue of spring. He'd been a good husband. For the first stage of their marriage, he'd been a strong and solid provider, a man who'd made the decisions so she didn't have to mind the details. He'd been an attentive father, if perhaps a mite too indulgent. The passion between them had quieted by the first anniversary of their wedding night, but passion was a difficult and distracting element in a life, such a demanding and unstable emotion. Not that she'd ever refused him, of course. Never once since their wedding night had she turned from him in their bed. Margaret was proud of that, proud she'd been a good and dutiful wife. Even when the idea of sex sickened her, hadn't she lain silent and allowed him his release? She clipped off more dead heads with a sharp clack of blades, placed the faded flowers in her discard basket. It was he who had turned away, he who had changed. Nothing had been the same in their marriage, in their lives, in their home, since that terrible morning, that hot, sticky August morning when they'd found their hope in the marsh. Sweet, good-natured Hope, she thought, with a grief that had become both duller and more heavy through the years. Hope, her bright little angel, the only one of the children who'd come from her, who had seemed truly connected, truly hers. There were times, after all these years, there were still times she wondered if that loss had been a kind of punishment, the taking away of the child she most loved. But what crime, what sin had she committed that had merited that kind of punishment? Indulgence, perhaps. Indulging the little girl when it would have been wiser, it was so easy to be wise with distance, to have discouraged, even to have forbade her sweet, innocent Hope from associating with the Bodine girl. That had been a mistake, but surely not a sin. And if it had been a sin, it had been more Jasper's. He'd brushed away her concerns when she'd voiced them, even laughed at them. The Bodine girl was harmless, that's what he'd said. Harmless. Jasper had paid for that misconception, that mistake, that sin, the whole rest of his life. And still, it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The Bodine girl had killed Hope as surely as if she'd choked the life from her with her own small and dirty hands. Now she was back to progress, back to the Marsh house, back to their lives, as if she had the right. Margaret yanked out some bindweed, tossed it into her basket. Her grandmother had liked to say that weeds were just wildflowers that bloomed in the wrong place, but they weren't. They were invaders and needed to be pulled out, cut down, destroyed, however it could be done. Victoria Bodine could not be allowed to set roots and bloom in progress. She looked so pretty, Cade mused. His mother, that admirable and unreachable woman. She dressed for gardening as she dressed for everything, with care, precision, and perfection. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat to shade her head, the ribbon around it soft blue to match the long cotton skirt and crisp blouse she protected with a dull gray gardening apron. There were pearls at her ears, round moons of white as luminous as the gardenias she so treasured. She'd let her hair go white as well, though she was only 53. It was as if she wanted that symbol of age and dignity. Her skin was smooth, worry never seemed to show on it. The contrast of that pretty youthful face and the shock of white hair was striking. She'd kept her figure. She sculpted it ruthlessly with diet and exercise. Unwanted pounds weren't tolerated any more than the stray weed in her gardens. She'd been a widow 8 years now and had slid so slickly into that slot it was hard to remember her being otherwise. He knew she was displeased with him, but that was nothing new. Her displeasure was most usually expressed in the same way as her approval, with a few cool words. He couldn't remember the last time she'd touched him with feeling or with warmth. He couldn't remember if he had ever expected her to do so. But she remained his mother, and he would do what he could to close the rift between them. He knew too well how a rift could widen into a gulf with silence. A small yellow butterfly flitted around her head and was ignored. She knew it was there, just as she knew he walked to her with long strides along the bricked path, but she acknowledged neither. "It's a nice morning for being outside," Cade began. "Spring's been good to the flowers. We could use some rain." "They're calling for some tonight, and none too soon. April's been drier than I like." He crouched down, leaving an arm's span between them. Nearby bees hummed madly in the hills of azaleas. "Most of the first cultivating's done. I've got to go round and check on how the cattle's doing. We got some bull calves ready to become steers. I've got some errands here and there. Is there anything I can pick up for you?" "I could use some weed killer." She lifted her head then. Her eyes were a paler, quieter blue than his own, but they were just as direct. Unless you have some moral objection to my using it in my gardens. They're your gardens, Mama. And your fields, as I have been reminded. You will deal with them as you choose. Just as the properties are your properties, you'll rent them to whom you please. That's right. He could be as cool as she when he chose. And the income from those fields and those properties will keep Beau Rev in the black well into it, as long as it's in my hands. She pinched off a pansy with quick, ruthless fingers. Income is not the standard by which one lives one's life. Sure as hell makes life easier. There is no call to take that tone with me. I beg your pardon, I thought there was. He set his hands on his knees, waited for them to relax. I changed the way the farm's run, started changing it over 5 years back, and it works. Still, you refuse to accept or acknowledge that I've made it work. There's nothing I can do about that. As for the properties, I do that my own way as well. Papa's way isn't mine. Do you think he would have let that Bodine girl set foot on what was ours? I don't know. Or care, she said, and went back to her weeding. Maybe not. He looked away. I can't live my life asking myself what he would have done or wanted or expected. But I do know Tory Bodine isn't responsible for what happened 18 years ago. You're wrong. Well, one of us is. He got to his feet. Either way, she's here, has a right to be here. There's nothing to be done about it. They would see, Margaret thought, as her son left her alone. They would see what could be done about it. His mood stayed raw throughout the day. No matter how many times he tried and failed to reach his mother, he felt the sting of that rejection as fresh as the first. He'd stopped trying to explain and justify his changes to the farm. He still remembered the night he'd shown her charts and graphs and projections, still remembered how she'd stared at him, had stonily informed him before she'd walked away that Beau Rev was something that couldn't be put on paper and analyzed. It had hurt more, he supposed, because she'd been right. It couldn't be put on paper. Neither could the land itself that he was so determined to protect, preserve, and pass on to the next generation of Lavelles. His pride in it, his duty to it, were no less fierce than hers. But to Cade it had always been a living thing that breathed and grew and changed with the seasons, and to her it was static like a monument carefully tended, or a grave. He tolerated her lack of belief in him just as he tolerated the amusement and the resentment of his neighbors. He dealt with countless sleepless nights during the first 3 years he'd been in charge of the farm. The fear and worry that he was wrong, that he would fail, that the legacy that had come into his hands would somehow slip through them in his eagerness, in the sheer stubbornness to do things his way. But he hadn't been wrong, not about the farm. Yes, it cost more in time, effort, and money to grow cotton organically, but the land, oh, the land thrived. He could see it bursting in the summer, resting in the winter, and in spring thirsty for what he would put into it. He refused to poison it, no matter how many told him that by that refusal he was dooming earth and crop. They'd called him wrong-headed, stubborn, foolish, and worse. And the first year he'd met government standards for organic cotton, had harvested and sold his crop, he'd celebrated by getting quietly drunk alone in the tower office that had been his father's. He bought more cattle because he believed in diversification. He added on more horses because he loved them, and because both horses and cattle made manure. He believed in the strength and value of green cotton. He studied, he experimented, he learned. He stood by his beliefs enough to hand-chop weeds when it was necessary and to nurse his blisters without complaint. He watched the skies and the stock reports with equal devotion, and he plowed the profits back into the land just as he plowed the cotton after harvest. Other areas of the operation were necessary, the leases and rentals and factories. He used them, worked them, juggled them, but they didn't own his heart. The land did. He couldn't explain it and had never tried, but he loved Beau Rev the same way some men love a woman, completely, obsessively, jealously. Every year his blood thrilled when it gave birth for him. Cool morning had become steamy afternoon by the time he finished the bulk of his chores and errands. He carried the list in his head, ticking them off systematically. He stopped by the nursery 2 blocks off the town square to pick up his mother's weed killer. The flats of flowers distracted him. He selected a tray of pink rosebud impatiens on impulse and carried them inside. The Clampetts had run the nursery for 10 years, starting it as a roadside operation to supplement their soybean farm. Over the decade, they'd done better with flowers than crop. The more successful the nursery, the bigger the burr that lodged in the craw of the Clampett men. Get another one of them for 20% off. Billy Clampett puffed on a Camel directly under the no-smoking sign his mother had tacked to the wall. Charge me for 2 then. I'll pick the other one up on the way out. Cade set the flat on the counter. He'd gone to school with Billy, though they'd never really been friends. How's it going? Slow, but sure. Billy squinted through smoke. His eyes were dark and discontented. He wore his hair in a vicious buzz cut that looked sharp as needles to the touch and was no particular color at all. He'd put on weight since high school, or more accurately, had lost the muscle that had made him a star tackle. You going to plant those as another cover crop? No. Unwilling to get into a pissing match, Cade wandered over to study a selection of pots. He picked 2 in a verdigris shade, set them on the counter. I need some Roundup. Billy pinched off the cigarette, dropped the butt into the bottle he kept under the counter. He knew better than to leave evidence his ma would find and scold him over. Well, now, didn't think you approved of such things. When'd you stop hugging trees? And a bag of potting soil for the impatiens, Cade said easily. Mike could get you some aldicarb, too. You in the market for insecticide? No, thanks. No, that's right, Billy gave a wheezy laugh. You don't go in for insecticides and pesticides and that nasty chemical fertilizer. Your crops, they're virgin pure. Got yourself wrote up in a magazine 'cause of it. When did you start reading? Cade said pleasantly, or did you just look at the pictures? Fancy magazines and speeches don't mean squat around here. Everybody knows you just sit back and take the benefits from the expense your neighbors put into their fields. Is that so? Yeah, that's so, Billy lashed out. You had a couple of good years, just dumbass luck if you ask me. I don't recall asking you, Billy. You want to ring me up here? Sooner or later it's going to cave in on you. You're just inviting pest and disease. It had been a long, boring day, and Cade Lavelle was one of Billy's favorite targets. The pussy never fought back. Your crops get infected, others will too, then there'll be hell to pay. I'll keep that in mind. Cade took some bills from his wallet, tossed them on the counter. I'll just carry this out to the truck while you ring it up. He kept a choke chain on his temper, much as he would a vicious dog. Unleashed, it was a cold and savage thing. Billy Clampett wasn't worth the time and the effort it would take to yank it back in line once it was loose. That's what he told himself as he set the pots and the 2 flats in the truck. When he came back, the Roundup and a 20-pound bag of potting soil were on the counter. You got $3.06 coming. With deliberate slowness, Billy counted out the change. Saw that sister of yours a time or 2 round town. She sure looks good these days. He raised his eyes, smiled. Real good. Cade shoved the change in his pocket, kept his fist in there as it wanted to plant itself on that sneering mouth. How's your wife these days, Billy? Darlene, she's just fine. Pregnant again, 3rd time. I expect I planted another strong son in her. When I plow a field or a woman, I do it right. His eyes glinted as his smile spread. Just ask your sister. Cade's hand was out of his pocket and yanking Billy to his toes by the collar before either of them was prepared for it. Just one thing, Cade said softly. You want to remember who holds the deed on that house you're living in. You want to remember that, Billy, and you want to stay clear of my sister. You wave your money around fast enough, but you haven't got the balls to try your fists like a man. Stay clear of my sister, Cade repeated, or you'll find out just what I've got the balls for. Cade released him, picked up the rest of his purchases, and strode out. He drove out of the lot and to the first stop sign. There he simply sat, eyes closed until the red wash of fury dulled. He wasn't sure which was worse, all but coming to blows with Clampett while the 2 of them were surrounded by posies, or having the seed rooting in his mind that his sister had let scum like Clampett put his hands on her. Shoving the truck into first, he turned and headed over to Market. He found a spot half a block from Torrey's shop, just behind Dwight's truck. Doing his best to smother his temper, he hauled the pots out, carried them down to set them outside the door. He could hear the high whine of a skill saw before he walked inside. The base of the counters was in place and the first line of shelves set. She'd gone with pine and had them clear varnished. A smart choice, Cade thought. Simple and clean, they'd show off her wares instead of distracting from them. The floor was covered with tarp and tools, and the air smelled of sawdust and sweat. Hey, Cade. Dwight walked over, skirting tools. Cade gave Dwight's blue and gold striped tie a tap. Now aren't you pretty? Had a meetin', bunch of bankers. As if just remembering it was over, Dwight reached up and loosened the knot in the tie. Just came by to check on the job before I go into the office. You're making progress. The client has definite ideas about what she wants and when she wants it. Dwight rolled his eyes. We're here to accommodate, and let me tell you, she don't give you an inch of wiggle room. That skinny little girl grew up to be one hard-headed businesswoman. Where is she? In the back. Dwight nodded toward the closed door. Stays out of the way, I'll give her that. Stays out once she gets her way is more like it. Cade took another moment to scan the work in progress. Her way looks good, he decided. Gotta admit it does. Listen, Cade. Dwight shifted his feet. Lissy's got this friend. No. Well, Jesus, just hear me out. I don't have to. She's got a friend, a single female friend who'd be just perfect for me. Why don't I give this single female friend a call, or come on by and have dinner with this single female friend and y'all at the house, or meet for drinks? Well, why don't you? Lissy's going to be on my back till you do. Your wife, your back, your problem. Tell Lissy you just found out I'm gay or something. Oh, yeah, that'll work. The idea amused Dwight so much his laughter rolled up from the gut. That'll work just fine. Way things are, she'd just start lining up men for you. God almighty. It wasn't, Cade realized, out of the realm of possibility. Then tell her I'm having a blazing backstreet affair with someone. Who? Pick somebody, Cade said, waving it off and heading for the back room door. Just tell her no. He knocked, then shoved inside without waiting for an answer. Tori stood on a stepladder, replacing a fluorescent tube in the overhead light fixture. Here, let me do that. I've got it. This is a tenant's obligation, not the landlord's. It still grated just a little to realize he owned the building. I see they got the glass replaced on the front door. Yes, thank you. Feels like they fixed the air conditioning. That's right. If you need to be pissed off at me today, you're going to have to get in line. There's quite a wait. He turned away, hands in pockets. She'd gone for metal shelves in here, he noted, gray, ugly, sturdy, and practical. They were already jammed with cardboard boxes, and the boxes meticulously labeled by stock number. She'd bought a desk, again sturdy and practical. A computer and a phone were already on it, as was a neatly stacked pile of paperwork. In 10 days, she'd organized considerably. Not once had she asked for or accepted his help. He wished it didn't irk him. She was wearing black shorts, a gray t-shirt, and gray sneakers. He wished they didn't appeal to him. He turned back as she came down the ladder, took hold of it to fold up just as she did. I'll put it away for you. I can do it. He tugged, so did she. God damn it, Tori. The sudden hiss of temper, the dangerous flash in his eyes, had her stepping back, clasping her hands. He slapped the ladder together, shoved it into a small closet. When he just stood there, his back to her, she felt a pang of guilt and of sympathy. It was odd to realize she didn't feel fear or trepidation, as she usually did around angry men. Sit down, Cade. Why? Because you look like you need to. She walked over to where she'd hauled in a mini-fridge, found a bottle of Coke, twisted the top. Here, cool off. Thanks. He dropped down on the chair at her desk, took a long swig from the bottle. Bad day? I've had a score of better ones. Saying nothing, she opened her purse and found the cloisonné pill box where she kept aspirin. When she offered him two, he lifted his brows. She felt heat rise fast and dark to her cheeks. It just shows, that's all. Appreciate it. He popped the aspirin, sighed, rolled his shoulders. I don't suppose you'd be willing to make it some better by coming over here and sitting on my lap. No, I wouldn't. Had to ask. How about dinner and a movie? No, don't say no without even thinking about it, he said before she could speak. Just dinner and a movie. Hell, a pizza, a burger, something friendly. I promise not to ask you to marry me. That's a relief, but not much of an incentive. Just think about it for 5 minutes. He set the bottle on her desk, then rose. Come on outside, I got something for you. I haven't finished in here. Woman, do you have to argue about every damn thing? It wears me out. To solve the problem, he took her hand, pulled her to the door, and through. She might have taken a stand just on principle, but there were 2 carpenters in the shop, which meant 2 sets of eyes and ears. There would be less for them to talk about if she calmly stepped outside with Cade. I like the look of these, he began, gesturing toward the pots while he continued to pull her down the sidewalk to his truck. If you don't, you can exchange them at Clampett's. Same goes for these, I suppose. He stopped, took one flat out of the truck bed, but I think they suit well enough. Suit what? You, your place. Consider them a kind of good luck gift, even though you have to pot them yourself. He pushed the first flat into her hand, took out the second and the bag of soil. She stood there baffled and touched. She'd wanted flowers, she remembered, flowers in pots for the front of the shop. She'd thought of petunias, but these were prettier and every bit as friendly. "This was kind of you and thoughtful. Thank you. Could you look at me?" He waited until she shifted her gaze, met his eyes. "You're welcome. Where do you want them?" "We've just set them out front. I'll pot them." As they started up the sidewalk together, she gave him one sidelong glance. "Oh, hell, you could come by around 6. I wouldn't mind the pizza. If we get through that all right, we can talk about the movie." "Fine." He set the flowers and soil down in front of her display window. "I'll be back." "Yes, I know," she murmured when he strolled off. 8. Maybe people didn't actually die of boredom, Faith decided, but she didn't know how the hell they lived with it either. When she'd been a child and complained she had nothing to do, the words had fallen on unsympathetic adult ears, and chores had been assigned. She hated chores nearly as much as she hated boredom, but some lessons are hard learned. "There's nothing to do around here." Faith lounged at the kitchen table, picking at a breakfast biscuit. It was after 11, but she hadn't bothered to dress. She wore the silk robe she'd bought on a trip to Savannah in April. She was already bored with that, too. "Everything's the same around here, day after day, month after month. I swear it's a wonder every blessed one of us doesn't run screaming into the night." "Got yourself a case of ennui, do you, Miss Faith?" Lila's rough-as-sandstone voice cruised over the French pronunciation. She used it partly because her grandmother had been Creole, but mostly because it just tickled her. "Nothing ever happens around here. Every morning's the same as the one before, and the whole day stretches out in a long, thin line of more nothing." Lila continued to scrub at the counter. The truth was she'd had the kitchen tidied up for more than an hour, but she'd known Faith would wander in. She'd been lying in wait. "I guess you're hankering for some activity." She sent Faith a soft look out of guileless brown eyes. As guile was something Lila had in spades, this look had taken some practice. But she knew her target. She'd looked after Miss Faith since the day the girl had been born. Born, Lila recalled with some affection, wailing and waving bunch fists at the world. Lila herself had been part of the Lavelle household since her own 20th year, when she'd been hired on to help with the cleaning, while Miss Lavelle had been carrying Mr. Cade. Her hair had been black then instead of the salt and pepper it was now. Her hips had been a mite more narrow, but she hadn't let herself go. She'd matured, she liked to think, into a fine figure of a woman. Her skin was the color of the dark caramel she melted to coat apples every Halloween. She liked to set it off with a good strong red lipstick and carried a tube in her apron pocket. She'd never married. Not that she hadn't had the opportunity. Lila Jackson had had plenty of beaus in her day. And since her day was far from over, she still enjoyed getting herself gussied up to go on the town with a good-looking man. But marrying one, well, that was a different kettle. She preferred things just as they were, and that meant having a man come calling at the door and escorting her where she liked to go. If he expected to escort her again, he'd best remember to bring along a nice box of chocolates or some posies and open doors for her like a gentleman. Marry one, and you spent your life picking up after him, watching him fart and scratch and God knew what, while you sweated to make the paycheck stretch to keep body and soul together and buy a few pretty things of your own. No, this way she had a fine house. As tell the truth and shame the devil, Beau Rev was as much hers as anyone's. She'd raised 3 babies and grieved her heart sick over the lost one, and had, to her way of thinking, all the benefits of male companions without any of the problems. She didn't mind a good snuggle now and again, either. If the good Lord hadn't meant for his children to snuggle, he wouldn't have put the need for it inside 'em. Now, Miss Faith, she mused, was just packed full of needs and had yet to figure out how to meet them without causing herself grief. That meant the girl was equally full of problems, most of her own making. Some chicks, Lila knew, just took longer to find their way around the barnyard. "Maybe you could take yourself a nice long drive," Lila suggested. "To where?" Faith sipped her coffee without interest. "Everything looks the same, any direction." Lila took out her lipstick, touched it up in the chrome reflection of the toaster. "I know what perks me up when I got the blues, a good spurt of shopping." "I suppose," Faith sighed and toyed with the idea of driving down to Charleston. "Nothing better to do." "That's fine, then. You go on shopping and brighten up your spirits. Here's the list." Faith blinked, then stared at the shopping list Lila waved in front of her face. "Groceries? I'm not going to go shopping for groceries. You got nothing better to do, said so yourself. You make sure those tomatoes are ripe, you hear, and you get the floor cleaner I got written down. The TV commercial made me laugh, and that's worth giving it a try. She turned back to the sink to rinse her dish rag and had to hold in a cackle at the way the girl's mouth was hanging open. Then you go on by the drugstore and get me some of my oil of Olay, the kind in the jar, not the bottle, and the bath bubbles, the milk and honey ones. On the way back, you stop by the dry cleaners and pick up all the stuff I hauled down there last week, mostly yours anyway. God knows what you need with 100 silk blouses. Faith narrowed her eyes. Anything else? She said sweetly. It's all written down, plain as day. Give you something to do with your bored self for a couple of hours. Now go get some clothes on. It's going on noon. Sinful, just sinful to be lazing around in your robe half the damn day. Go on, get. Lila made shooing motions, then snatched up Faith's plate and cup. I haven't finished my breakfast. I didn't see you eating it. Picking and pouting's what you were doing. Now get out of my kitchen and make yourself useful for a change. Lila folded her arms, angled her head, and stared. She had a way of staring that could wither the bravest soul. Faith shoved back from the table, sniffed, and stalked out. I'll be back when I'm back, she called out. With a shake of her head and a chuckle, Lila finished off Faith's coffee herself. Some chicks, they just never learn who rules the roost. It had taken Wade 3 years and 18 pups to convince Dottie Bettram to have her oversexed lab retriever mix spayed. The last litter of 6 were just weaned, and while their mama slept off the effects of the surgery, he gave each of the cheerfully barking puppies the necessary shots. I just can't look at the needles, Wade. Makes me lightheaded. You don't need to look, Miss Bettram. Why don't you just go on out and wait? We'll be done here in just a few minutes. Oh! Her hands butterflied up to her cheeks, and her myopic eyes shone with distress behind the thick lenses of her glasses. I feel like I should stay. Doesn't seem right to just... She trailed off when Wade slid the needle under fur. Maxine, take Miss Bettram on out to the waiting room. He gave his assistant a quick wink. I can handle this. Handle it better, he thought, as Maxine helped the staggering woman out of the room without sweet little old ladies fainting on the floor. Here you go, little guy. Wade rubbed the puppy's belly to soothe it and completed the inoculations. He weighed, scratched ears, checked for parasites, and filled out charts while yips and barks echoed off the walls. Miss Bettram's Sadie slept peacefully, and post-op, old Mr. Klingle's cat, Sylvester, hissed and squalled in his cage, and Speedy Petey, Progress Elementary's 3rd-grade hamster mascot, raced on his wheel, proving he was recovered from a mild bladder infection. It was, for Dr. Wade Mooney, his own little paradise. He finished up the last pup while the siblings tumbled over each other, tugged at his shoelaces, or piddled on the floor. Miss Bettram had assured him she'd found good homes for 5 of the puppies already. He had, as always, gently declined her offer to take one for himself, but he had an idea just where the last of the lot could make his home. Doc Wade, Maxine peeked back in. All done here, let's gather up the troops. They're so cute. Her dark eyes danced. I thought you were going to give in and take one of this batch. Once you start, you'll never stop. But his dimples deepened as a pup wormed and wiggled in his hands. Wish I could take one. Maxine picked up a puppy, cuddling while it licked her face with desperate love and speed. She adored animals, which is why the opportunity to work for Doc Wade had been heaven sent. There were already 2 dogs at home, and she knew better than to think she could talk her parents into indulging her with another. She'd been born in the holler, and her parents had worked their fingers raw, lifting themselves, their daughter, and their 2 sons out of it. Money was still tight, she reminded herself as she cuddled and pined for the puppy. And money would stay tight a while longer, she thought with a sigh. She was the first of her family to get into college, and every penny had to be saved. They're so sweet, Doc Wade, but between work and school I wouldn't have time to give it enough attention. She set the pup down again, besides the fact my daddy'd kill me. Wade only grinned. Maxine's father adored her. Classes going all right? She rolled her eyes. She was in her 2nd year of college, and time was as tight as money. If it hadn't been for Doc Wade giving her the most flexible of hours and letting her study when things were quiet, she'd never have made it this far. He was her hero, and she'd once had a wonderfully painful crush on him. Now she only hoped to one day be as good and clever a veterinarian as he was. Finals coming up. I got so much in my head it feels like it's going to burst. I'll take these babies out, Doc Wade. She hefted the basket full of puppies. What should I tell Miss Bettram about Sadie? She can pick her up later this afternoon. Tell her around 4. Oh, and ask her not to give that last pup away. I've got a line on someone. "Will do. Is it all right if I take lunch now? We're clear for an hour, and I thought I'd go study some in the park." "Go ahead." He turned to the sink to scrub his hands. "Take the full hour, Maxine. Let's see how much more you can fit in that brain of yours." "Thanks." He was going to be sorry to lose her, which Wade imagined he would as soon as she had a degree hot in her hand. It wasn't going to be easy to find someone as competent, as willing, or as good with the animals, who could also type, deal with frantic pet owners, and answer the phone. But life moved on. He started toward the back to check on Sadie just as Faith came in the rear door. "Dr. Mooney, just who I was looking for." "I'm easy to find this time of day." "Well, I'm just passing through." He cocked an eyebrow. "That's quite a dress for just passing through." "Oh." She ran a finger down the soft cotton fabric of the thin-strapped, fully skirted number in bold poppy red. "Like it? I'm in a red kind of mood." She shook her hair back, sent out seductive clouds of scent. Stepping forward, she skimmed her hands up his chest, over his shoulders. "Guess what I've got on under it?" Every time, he thought, like a finger snap, just one look at her had him ready to beg. "Why don't you give me a hint?" "You're such a smart man. Got that college degree and those letters after your name?" She took his hand and, covered with hers, trailed it up her thigh. "I bet you could find out right quick." Jesus, his blood took a violent panther's leap. "You go walking around town with next to nothing on." "And you and me, we're the only ones who know." She leaned forward, her eyes bright on his, and nipped his lower lip. "What you gonna do about it, Wade?" "Come upstairs." Too far. With a throaty laugh, she nudged the door open behind him. "I want you now, and I want you fast." The dog slept quietly, her breathing regular. The room smelled of canine and antiseptic. The old chair, where he spent many hours watching over patients, was pricked with hair shed from countless dogs and cats. "I haven't locked up." "Let's live dangerously." She flipped open the button of his jeans, dragged down the zipper. "Why, look what I found." She wrapped her hand around him, watched his melted chocolate eyes go blurry before he crushed his mouth on hers. The sly excitement she'd felt when dressing, when driving into town, knowing she'd go to him, seduce him, turned into something tangled and needy, nearly painful. "Take me someplace." She arched back while his mouth fed on her throat. "Take me someplace hot and dark and wild. I need to go. Hurry and take me there." The jagged edge of her desperation knifed through his blood, leaving him raw. There was nothing tame between them when they came together like this, nothing soft, nothing sweet. When she was panting his name and her hands were on him, he forgot he wanted the soft and sweet. All he wanted was Faith. He tossed up the red skirts, gripped her hips. She was hot and she was wet and seemed to clamp over him like a greedy jaw when he drove himself into her. She wrapped one leg around his waist and moaned long and deep. He filled the empty places. It didn't matter if it was only for the moment. If the emptiness came back, he filled them, and no one else ever had. Harsh animal pants, the solid rhythmic thud of body against body, bodies against wood, and the slick, strong feel of him pounding into her. She let go with a small, strangled cry in her throat as the orgasm sprang free. She always came fast and hard with Wade, such a surprise, such a lovely little shock to the system. Then it would start again, slower, deeper, a long and gradual rip that opened something inside her to him. And because it was him, she could cling, she could surrender to it. She could hold on and know he'd be there with her when she fell. The phone was ringing, or his ears were. Every breath he took was ripe with her. She moved with him, thrust for thrust, never stopping, never slowing. There were times when he could think about her sanely, and when he wondered why the two of them didn't just devour each other until nothing was left. She was saying his name over and over, punctuating the word with gasps and whimpers, and he saw, just before he emptied into her, her eyes close as if in prayer. God! She shuddered once, let her head rest back against the door, kept her eyes shut. God, I feel wonderful, just like gold, inside and out. She opened her eyes, stretching lazily. How about you? He knew what she expected, so resisted burying his face in her hair, murmuring words she wouldn't believe, words that hadn't mattered to her years before when he'd been foolish enough to say them. That was a lot more appetizing than the BLT I planned for lunch. It made her laugh and hook her arms around his neck in a manner that was as friendly as it was intimate. There's still some parts of me you didn't nibble on, so if... Wade, honey, you upstairs? Jesus, the part of him that was still nestled cozily inside Faith shriveled. My mother. Well, isn't this interesting? Even as Faith snorted out a laugh, Wade was clamping his hand over her mouth. Hush, Christ Jesus, this is all I need. Eyes dancing, Faith muttered against his hand while her body shook with laughter. It's not funny. He hissed it out, but had to struggle back a laugh of his own. He could hear his mother wandering around, cheerfully calling him in the same chirpy sing-song she'd used to call him for supper when he'd been 10. Just be quiet, he whispered to Faith, and stay here. Stay right in here and don't make a sound. He eased back slowly, eyes narrowed as Faith bit her lip and snickered. Wait, honey, she said when he reached for the door. Then she squeezed her own mouth shut with her fingers when he turned to snarl at her. Not a sound, he repeated. Okay, but I just thought you might want to put that away. He glanced down, swore, and hurriedly stuffed himself back into his jeans and zipped. Mama? He shot Faith one last warning look, then stepped outside, firmly closing the door behind him. I'm down here. I was just checking on a patient. He sprinted up the steps, grateful his mother had gone up to search him out. There you are, my baby. I was just going to leave you a little love note. Boots Mooney was a package of contradictions. She was a tall woman, but everyone thought of her as little. She had a voice like a cartoon kitten and a will of iron. She'd been the Cotton Queen her senior year of high school and had gone on to reign as Miss Georgetown County. Her looks, wholesome, rosy, and candy pretty, had served her well. She preserved them religiously, not out of vanity, but out of a spirit of obligation. Her husband was an important man, and she would never allow him to be seen with less than he deserved. Boots enjoyed pretty things, including herself. She threw her arms open for Wade as if it had been 2 years rather than 2 days since she'd seen him. When he bent toward her, she kissed both his cheeks, then quickly drew back. Honey, you're flushed. Are you feverish? No. To his credit, he didn't wince when she laid the back of her hand on his brow. No, I'm fine. I was in post-op. It's a little warm in there. Distracting her was imperative, and he knew the surefire way. Look at you. He took her hand, spread her arms, and gave her a long, approving once-over. Don't you look pretty today? Oh, now, she laughed, but pinked up with pleasure. I just had my hair done is all. You should have seen me before Laurie got done with me. I look like a rag picker. Impossible. You're just biased. I had a fistful of errands to do and couldn't go home till I'd seen my baby. She gave his cheek a pat, then immediately turned toward the kitchen. I bet you haven't had lunch. I'm just going to fix you something. Mama, I have a patient, Miss Dottie Sadie. Oh, dear, what's wrong with her? Why, Dottie just'd be lost without that dog. Nothing's wrong. She's just been fixed. If nothing's wrong, what needed to be fixed? Wade dragged a hand through his hair while his mother poked in his refrigerator. Fixed so she'd stop having a litter of puppies every year. Oh. Wade, you don't have enough food in this house to keep body and soul together. I'm just going to pick up a few things for you at the market. Mama, don't mama me. You don't eat right since you left home, and you can't tell me different. I wish you'd come home for supper more often. I'm going to bring you over a nice tuna casserole tomorrow. That's your favorite. He hated tuna casserole, loathed it, but he'd never been able to convince her of it. I'd appreciate that. Maybe I'll take one out to little Tori, too. I just stopped over to see her. She looks so grown up. Boots put 3 eggs on to boil. That shop of hers is coming along so fast. I don't know where that girl gets the energy. God knows her mother never had any I could see, and her daddy, well, it's best not to speak if you can't speak kind. Boots folded her lips and hunted up a jar of pickles. Always had a soft spot for that child, though for one reason or another I never could get close to her. Poor little lamb, I used to wish I could just gather her up and bring her on home with me. Love, Wade thought, made you helpless. Wherever, however, it came. He walked over, wrapped his arms around Boots, and rested his cheek on her newly lacquered hair. I love you, Mama. Well, honey, I love you, too. That's why I'm going to make you a nice egg salad here so I don't have to stand around watching my only son starve to death. You're getting too thin. I haven't lost an ounce. Then you were too thin to start with. He had to laugh. Why don't you put another egg on, Mama, so there'll be enough for both of us? I'll just go down and see to Sadie, and I'll come back and we'll have lunch together. That'd be nice. You take your time. She slid another egg into the water and glanced over her shoulder as he went out. Boots was well aware her son was a grown man, but he was still her baby, and a mother never stopped worrying about or looking out for her own. Men, she thought with a sigh, were such delicate, such oblivious creatures, and women, well, certain women could take advantage of that. The doors of the old building weren't as thick as her son might believe, and a woman didn't reach the age of 53 without recognizing certain sounds for what they were. She had a pretty good idea just who'd been on the other side of that door with her boy. She'd reserved judgment on that matter, she told herself as she sliced up pickles, but she'd be watching Faith Lavelle like a hawk. She was gone. Wade realized he should have figured she would be. She'd stuck a post-it to the door, drawn a heart on it, and had pressed her lips to the center, leaving a sexy red kiss for him. He peeled it off, and though he told himself he was an idiot, tucked it into a drawer for safekeeping. She'd come back when she was in the mood, and he'd let her. He'd let her until he came to despise himself, or, if he was lucky, until his heart was whole and his again, and she was just an interesting diversion. He stroked a hand over Sadie's head, then checked her vitals, her incision and stitches. Because she was awake now, her deep brown eyes glassy and confused, he picked her up carefully. He'd take her upstairs with him so she wouldn't be alone. 9. Sex made her thirsty. In a much happier frame of mind than she'd been in, Faith decided to wander up to Hanson's and buy herself a bottle of something cold and sweet to enjoy on the way to the market. She glanced back at the vet's office, then up at Wade's apartment windows, blew him a mental kiss. She thought she might just give him a call later and see how he felt about taking a drive that evening. Maybe they could head over to Georgetown and find some pretty spot near the water. It was nice being with Wade, comfortable on one hand, exciting on the other. He was as dependable as sunrise, always there when she needed him. Memories of a long-ago summer when he'd spoken so easily of love and marriage, of houses and children, tried to wind through her mind, through her heart. She cast them out and set her mind on the thrill of fast, secret sex instead. That's what she wanted, and luckily, so did he. She'd oblige them both later. She'd borrow Cade's convertible, then they'd take that drive toward the coast. They'd park somewhere and neck like teenagers. She'd parked her own car several storefronts up from Wade's office. No point in giving tongues an excuse to wag, though God knew they wagged anyway over everything and nothing. She was about to slide in when she spotted Torrey walk out of her shop door, then just stand back on the sidewalk and stare. There's an odd duck who never did grow out of her funny feathers, Faith thought, but curiosity had her crossing the street. This one of your trances? Torrey jerked, then deliberately relaxed the shoulders that had tensed. I was just seeing how the window looks. The sign painter finished not long ago. Faith planted a hand on her hip and took a long look herself. The black scrolled letters looked fresh and classy. Southern Comfort, is that what you're selling? Yes. Because her pleasure in the moment had been dulled, Torrey walked back toward the door. You sure aren't very friendly to a potential customer. Torrey glanced back, eyes mild. Faith looked gorgeous, she thought. Sharp, smug, and satisfied, and she wasn't in the mood for it. I'm not open yet. Annoyed, Faith grabbed the door before it could shut in her face and squeezed inside. You don't look near ready to me, she commented, scanning the nearly empty shelves. Closer than it looks. I have work to do, Faith. Oh, don't mind me. You go on and do whatever. Faith wagged a hand, and as much out of stubbornness as interest began to wander. The place was clean as a whistle, she had to admit. The glass sparkled on the displays Dwight's men had built. The wood was polished to a gleam. Even the storage boxes were neatly stacked, and a large plastic bag held the styrofoam bits used for packing. There was a laptop computer and a clipboard on the counter. You got enough stuff to fill all this space? I will have. Resigned to the intrusion, Torrey continued to unpack stock. If she knew Faith Lavelle, her companion would shortly be bored and wander out again. If you're interested, I plan to open next Saturday. Selected stock will be 10% off that day only. Faith shrugged a shoulder. I'm usually busy over the weekends. She roamed by a waist-high counter with a glass top. Inside, on a drape of white satin, were examples of handcrafted jewelry. Silver and beads and colored stones artistically scattered, designed to catch the eye and the imagination. Forgetting herself, she started to lift the top, found it locked, and swore under her breath. She shot a cautious look toward Torrey, glad the other woman hadn't noticed. You got some pretty enough baubles here. She wanted the silver dangle earrings with the little lapis balls, and wanted them immediately. I didn't think you went in for baubles, hardly ever wear any yourself. I have 3 artists right now for baubles, Torrey added dryly. I particularly like the brooch in the center section. The wire's sterling and the stones are garnet, citron, and carnelian. I see it. They're all scattered on the wire like stars, like one of those sparklers the kids light on the 4th of July. Yes, very like that. It's nice enough, I suppose, but I'm not much for pins and brooches. She bit her lip, but avarice won over pride. I like these earrings here. Come back Saturday. I might be busy, and she wanted them now. Why don't you sell them to me, make yourself an early sale? That's what you're in business for, isn't it, to make sales? Tori set a pottery oil lamp on the shelf. She was careful to wipe the smile off her face before she turned. I'm not open for business yet, but... She started toward the display, for old time's sake. We never had any old times. I suppose you're right. She unhooked the keys that dangled from her belt loop. Which one caught your eye? That one, those. She tapped the glass, the silver and lapis. Yes, they're lovely. They suit you. Tori took them off the satin, held them to the light before passing them to Faith. You can use one of the mirrors if you want to try them on. The artist lives outside of Charleston. She does beautiful work. As Faith walked to a trio of mirrors framed in bronze and copper, Tori slipped a long pendant out of the case, thinking, why make one sale if you could make two? This is one of my favorite pieces of hers, she said. It'd go well with those. Trying not to be overly interested, Faith glanced down. The pendant was a thick barrel of lapis clasped in silver hands. Unusual. She switched her earrings for the new ones, then gave in and took the necklace. You won't see this walking back at you down the street. No, Tori allowed herself a smile. I plan to offer the unique. I suppose I should have both. Haven't treated myself in ages. Seems like everything you see around Progress is the same as the other. Quietly, Tori closed the top of the display. Not anymore. Lips pursed, Faith swiveled the chain around to look at the tag. Some people will say you're outpricing yourself. She skimmed her fingers down the chain as she looked back at Tori. They'd be wrong. This is fair enough. Fact is, you could charge more if you were in Charleston. But I'm not. I'll get your boxes. Don't bother. I'll just wear 'em out. She opened her purse, dropped her other earrings carelessly inside. You just cut the tags off for me and ring it up. Add it up, Tori corrected. I don't have the cash register set up yet. Whatever. She slipped off the necklace, the tagged earring. I'll write you a check. Faith lifted her eyebrows when Tori held out a hand. I can't write it until you give me the total. No, give me your other earrings. That's no way to treat them. I'll give you a box. With a short laugh, Faith dug them out again. All right, little mother. Sex and shopping, Faith thought as she wandered again. There couldn't be a better way to spend the day, and from the looks of things, she could spend a lot of pleasant time in Tori's shop. Who'd have thought that little spook-eyed Tori Bodine would grow into such fine taste and learn how to use it so cleverly? Must have been a powerful lot of work to hunt up the right things, to find the people who made those things, to calculate what to charge for them, and to design the space to display them. Likely more to it than that, Faith mused, bookkeeping and that kind of nasty thing. She found herself impressed and a little envious by the idea of having the gumption and the skill to create a business from nothing. Not that she'd want any part of such an undertaking and all that responsibility herself. A shop like this would tie you down tighter than a coil of hemp. But wasn't it nice the shop was so convenient to Wade? Maybe life in Progress was about to pick up for a while. You ought to tip this bowl up on a stand. She stopped, tipped the big serving bowl herself, so people can see the inside design from across the room. Tori had intended to once she'd unpacked her stands. Adding figures, she barely glanced up. Want a job? I've got your total here, tax included, but you should check my math. You always got better grades there than I did. She started over and the shop door opened. Faith would have sworn she heard Tori groan. Lissy's squeal was, in Tori's opinion, only one of her annoying habits. Among the others were her tendency to douse herself in a lily-of-the-valley scent that entered the room before she did and remained in it long after she'd left. As both the scent and the squeal entered her shop, Tori gritted her teeth in what she hoped would be mistaken for a smile. Oh, isn't this fun? I just got my hair done and was walking on down to the office when I saw y'all in here. As Lissy clasped her hands together and took a turn around, Tori shot Faith a single deadly look. It was answered by a lightning grin of perfect understanding and a coy flutter of lashes. I happened along just after Tori's sign was finished. And it looks just fine, too. Everything's coming right along, isn't it? With one hand on the weight of her belly, Lissy turned back to scan the shelves. It's all looking so pretty, Tori. Why, you must have worked like 6 mules to get so much done in so little time. And didn't my Dwight do a fine job? Yes, I couldn't be happier with the work. Of course not. He's the best there is. Oh, isn't this dear? She snatched the oil lamp Tori had just placed on the shelf. I just love things that sit around the house. Dust catchers, Dwight calls them, but it's those touches that make a home, isn't it? Tori took a deep breath. Just one more of those annoying traits was Lissy's habit of turning every sentence into an exclamation. Yes, I think so. If dust doesn't have some place to catch, it'd just fall on an empty table. Why, that's so true. Discreetly, Lissy turned the price tag over, then rounded her mouth into an O of surprise. My, it's dear, isn't it? It's handcrafted and signed, Tori began, but Faith rolled right over her. You get what you pay for, don't you, Lissy? And Dwight makes enough to indulge you, especially since you're about to pop with another baby. I swear if I ever carried a weight around for 9 months, the man who planted it there would have to buy me the moon and the stars. Not entirely sure if she was being complimented or insulted, Lissy frowned. Dwight just spoils me rotten. Of course he does. I just bought me these earrings. She gave the one still in her ear a spin with a fingertip. And a pendant, too. Tori's given me a little jump on her Saturday opening. Really? Lissy's eyes went sharp and narrow. As Faith knew, she wasn't one to tolerate anyone getting ahead of her. She clutched the lamp greedily to her breasts. Tori, you just have to let me have this now. My heart's just set on it. I don't know if I can get in here first thing on Saturday, and somebody else might snap it up. Be a doll, won't you, and let me buy it today? Tori circled Faith's total so that she could begin calculating. It'll have to be cash or check, Lissy. I'm not set up for credit cards today, but I'd be happy to set it aside for you if... No, I can write you a check. Maybe since I'm here and all, I could just poke about for a bit. It's just like playing store. Yeah. Tori took the lamp, set it on the counter. It looked like she was open for business after all. Oh, are these mirrors for sale? Everything's for sale. Tori got a small navy blue box from under the counter, placed Faith's earrings inside. I'm going to put the artist card in with your old earrings. Fine. You don't have to thank me, she said under her breath. I'm debating whether you did it to be helpful or to irritate me, Tori said equably, or irritate her, but... She noted down the price of the lamp. A sale's a sale, so I will thank you. You knew just which buttons to push. On that one, Faith glanced over to where Lissy was oohing and aahing and chattering. She's as simple as they come. She buys one of those mirrors and she could be my new best friend. Well, I like that. Enjoying herself more than she'd imagined, Faith pulled out her checkbook. I get shoved aside, and after I gave you your first sale, too. I just have to have this mirror, Tori, the oval one with the lilies going up the side. I've never seen anything like it. It'll look so sweet in my little sitting room. Tori's eyes met Faith's over the counter, gleamed. Sorry, she just outbought you. To Lissy, she called out, I'll get the box out of the back room. I appreciate that. I swear there's just so much to choose from already, and I guess you're not half set up. I was telling Dwight just the other night that I don't see where you find the time. Between moving into the house, setting things up here, handling deliveries, and spending evenings with Cade, you must have found yourself a 26-hour day. Cade? The name popped simultaneously from Tori's and Faith's lips. That man moved faster than I gave him credit for. Lissy wandered back. I have to say I never pictured the two of you together as a couple, but you know what they say about still waters. Yes, no, Tori held up a hand. I don't know what you're talking about. Cade and I aren't together. Oh, there's no need to be coy when it's just us girls. Dwight told me all about it, explained you'd probably want to keep it quiet a while. I haven't told a soul, don't you worry. There's nothing to tell, absolutely nothing to tell. We just... She saw 2 pairs of eyes sharpen and felt her tongue go thick. Nothing. Dwight's mistaken. I'll go get the box. Don't know why she's so hell-bent to keep it secret, Lissy commented when Tori rushed into the storeroom. After all, it's not like either of them's married or anything. Of course, she added with a smirk, I guess the idea she's rolling on the sheets with Cade after being back here less than a month doesn't go with that quiet, proper lady attitude she's painting herself with. Oh? Cade's business was Cade's business, Faith told herself, but she'd be damned if she'd let this little cat claw at him. Don't quiet, proper ladies have sex? With a viciously bright smile, she tapped a finger on Lissy's belly. I guess that bump you got there's from eating too much chocolate. I'm a married woman. You weren't when you and Dwight were bouncing around in the back seat of the second-hand Camaro his daddy bought him when he lettered in track. Oh, for heaven's sakes, Faith, you did plenty of bouncing of your own back then. Exactly. That's why I'm damn careful where I aim my stone if I get an urge to throw one. She signed her check with a flourish, then picked up the mate to her new earring. All I'm saying is that for somebody who's barely back in progress and who's been doing God knows what all these years, she sure has latched onto a Lavelle mighty fast. Nobody latches onto a Lavelle unless we want 'em to. But she was going to think about this. She was going to think about it good and hard. Tori was tempted to close up as soon as she nudged her two unexpected customers out the door, but that would have thrown her off schedule and given Lissy's foolish gossip too much importance. She worked on her stock another 3 hours, systematically pricing, logging, and arranging. The manual labor and the tedium of paperwork kept her from brooding. But the drive home gave her ample opportunity. This was not the way she intended to establish herself in progress again. She wasn't going to tolerate, not for 1 minute, being the focus of town gossip. The way to quash it, she told herself, was to ignore it, to rise above it, and to keep her distance from Cade. None of that would cause her any problem at all. She was used to ignoring wagging tongues and over matters a great deal more vital than some trumped-up romance. She certainly didn't have to spend any time with Cade Lavelle. She barely had in any case. A couple of meals, a movie or two, maybe a drive, all harmless occupations where they'd just happen to go together. From now on, she'd just go alone. And that, she thought, was that. It might have been if she hadn't spotted his truck at the edge of a field. She told herself to drive by. Really, there was no point in stopping, no reason to discuss it. It would be much more sensible to continue home and let the entire foolish matter die a natural death. And she kept seeing the hungry, predatory gleam in Lissy's eyes. She jerked the wheel, pulled to the side of the road where the grass was choppy and thick. She was just going to mention it, that was all. Just mention that Cade should shut the hell up and stop talking about her with his idiot buddies. This wasn't high school, damn it. Piney Cobb took a long contemplative drag from the last Marlboro in his pack. He'd watched the station wagon swerve to the shoulder, watched the woman, damn if it wasn't a little Bodine girl all grown up, start her march to the field, and he kept watching as she aimed her feet between the rows and kept on coming. Beside him, Cade stood studying the day's work and the progress of the crop. Boy had funny ideas if you asked him, but those funny ideas were working. It was none of his never mind anyway. He got paid all the same, whether he sprayed hell out of the crop or babied it with cow shit and ladybugs. Could use another good rain like we had the other night, Cade mused. Could. Piney scratched his grizzled chin and pursed his lips. What you got here's a good 3 inches higher than the traditional fields. Organic cotton grows faster, Cade said absently. Chemicals stunt growth. Yeah, so you've said. And so, despite Piney's doubts, it had been proven true. It made him think maybe all in all college educations weren't all bullshit. Not that he'd say so right out loud, but it was something to mull on. Boss, Piney took a last pull on his cigarette, then carefully tramped it out underfoot. You got female problems? Since his mind was full of work, it took Cade a minute. Excuse me? See, myself, I've kept pretty clear of females, but I've been around this world long enough to recognize a woman getting up ahead of steam. He shifted his gaze, squinting against the sun, and nodded lazily to where Tori was plowing her way up the rows. There's one now. From the look of things, you're dead in her sights. I got no problems. I'd say you're wrong about that one, Piney muttered, and eased a step back so as not to be hit with the fallout. Cade? It was a pleasure to see her, a simple, easy pleasure. Tori, this is a nice surprise. Really? We'll see about that. I need to talk to you. All right. Alone. I'll just mosey along. Tori sucked in her breath, remembered her manners. I beg your pardon, Mr. Cobb. No need for that. I didn't think you'd remember me. She hadn't, or hadn't consciously. She'd said his name without thinking about it. Now for a moment her temper was coated with an old image of a scrawny, thin-chested man with wheat-colored hair who smelled most usually of liquor and snuck her little peppermint drops. He was still scrawny, she noted, but age and drink had ravaged his face. It was red and worn and saggy, and the wheat-colored hair, if he still owned it, was thin enough to be covered completely by an old gray cap. I remember you used to give me candy, and you worked the field next to my father's. Did? His lips stretched out in a smile, revealing teeth as tilted and gapped as an old picket fence. Work for the college boy now. Pays better. I'll just be getting on. See you in the morning, boss man. He tipped his cap, then took a peppermint out of his pocket and handed it to Tori. As I recollect, you always favored these. I still do, thank you. It pleased him that you remembered, Cade said as Piney walked across the field toward the road. My father used to shout at him about the evils of whiskey, then about once a month they'd get drunk together. Next day, Piney'd be out in the field working as usual, and my father'd go back to shouting at him across the rows. She shook her head, turned to face Cade. I didn't stop for a trip down memory lane. Just what do you mean telling your friend Dwight that we're seeing each other? I'm not sure we're not seeing each other. Cade arched a brow, slipped off his sunglasses, hooked them on his shirt. Well, now, Tori, yes, we are. I'm standing here seeing you right now. You know very well what I mean. We're not dating. He didn't smile, but he wanted to. He settled for scratching his head instead and looking bemused. Seems to me we're doing something pretty close to that. We've gone out, 4 times in the last 10 days or so? To my thinking, when a man and a woman go out to dinner and such, it's a date. Your thinking's wrong. We're not dating, so just get that straight. Yes'm. Don't grin at me. A trio of crows cawed by, sleek and shiny. And even if you had that idea in your head, you had no business, no right to tell Dwight we were involved. He went right off and told Lissy, and now she's got it in her pea-brained head we're having some sort of wild sexual affair. I do not want or intend for people around here to assume I'm your latest fling. My latest? He hooked his thumbs in his pockets, rocked back on the worn heels of his work boots. As far as entertainment went, he considered this the day's highlight. Just how many flings do you think I've had? I have no interest. You're the one who brought it up, he pointed out, just for the pleasure of seeing her snarl. The point is, you told Dwight we were involved. No, I didn't, but I don't see... It came back to him. Oh, yeah, There. With a kind of triumph, she jabbed a finger at him. You're a grown man and should have gotten over the locker room talk. It was a misunderstanding, and a fascinating one in his opinion. Lissy keeps trying to set me up. Can't appear to stand having a single man running loose. It's a pain in the ass. Last time it came up, I told Dwight to get her off my back, to tell her I was having a hot affair or something. With me, she wondered steam didn't rise from her ears. Why, of all the... I didn't say you, Cade broke in. I imagine Dwight just picked you out as we were in your place at the time of the conversation. You want to jump somebody, jump him. But personally, I don't see what you're all het up about. We're both single, we're seeing each other. Now we are, Tori, he added before she could argue the point. And if Lissy wants to think things between us have progressed to what would be a natural stage, where's the harm? She wasn't sure she could speak. He was amused. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. You think this is funny? Not so much funny as anecdotal, he decided. Makes for an amusing little anecdote. Anecdotal my butt. Lissy'll have this spread all over the county if she hasn't already. The crows came back, circling. Oh, well, now, there's a tragedy. Maybe we should issue a press release denying all. She made a sound, something perilously close to a growl. When she whirled away, he took her arm and held her in place. Just simmer down, Victoria. Don't you tell me to simmer down. I'm trying to establish a business, a home here, and I don't want to be the subject of back-fence gossip. Back-fence gossip's the fuel that powers up small towns. You've lived in the city too long if you've forgotten that. And if people are talking, people are going to stroll into your shop to get a close-up look. Where's the harm in that? He made it sound gentle, reasonable. I don't like being gawked at. I've had enough of being gawked at. You knew there'd be some of that before you came back here. And if people want to gawk a bit at the woman who's caught Cade Lavell's eye, all they'll have to do is look at you to see why. You're turning this around. She wasn't entirely sure how, but she knew she wasn't on solid ground anymore. Faith was in the shop when Lissy made her announcement. He did wince, which gave her some satisfaction. There, not so cheerful about it now, are you? If Fate's going to poke at me about it and she won't be able to resist, it's about time I got something out of it." He tightened his grip on her arm, tossed his sunglasses on the ground beside them, then brought her a step closer. Alarm bells shrilled and her hand slapped against his chest. "What are you doing?" "No need to jump out of your skin." With his free hand, he cupped the back of her neck. "I'm just going to taste you." "Don't." But his lips were already skimming over hers. "Won't hurt, promise." He kept his word. It didn't hurt. It soothed and aroused. It eased and it stirred up those needs she'd locked so carefully away. But it didn't hurt. His mouth was soft, gentle, coaxing hers to taste, as he was. Warmth spread into her belly even as ropes of tension and awareness tangled together, and as that mix rose up toward her heart, he eased back. "I had a feeling," he murmured. His hand continued to rub and stroke the back of her neck. "Had it the first time I saw you again." Her head was spinning. It wasn't a sensation she enjoyed. "This is a mistake. I don't—" She stepped back in defense and felt something crunch under her heel. Damn, second pair this week. Kate only shook his head over the broken sunglasses. "Life's full of mistakes," he went on and kissed her again lightly. "This doesn't feel like one, but we're just going to have to see it through to find out." "Kate, I'm no good at this sort of thing." "Which sort? The kissing sort?" No, no. Her own laugh came as a surprise. How could he make her laugh when she was terrified? The man-woman thing, the relationship thing. "Then you'll just have to practice." "I don't want to practice." She could do nothing but sigh when he pressed his lips to her forehead. "Kate, there's so much you don't know about me." "It goes both ways, so let's find out. It's a nice evening." He slid his hand down to hers. "Why don't we go for a drive?" "This isn't dealing with the issue." "We can stop and get something to eat when the mood strikes." He turned her and rather elegantly bent down to pick up his ruined glasses. He began to walk with the young cotton between them. "One step at a time, Tori," he said quietly. "I'm a patient man. You look around here, pay attention, you can see how patient. Took me 3 seasons to turn the farm around to where I wanted it, to what I believed in, and I did that against a couple of generations of tradition. There are people who still point and snicker, or grumble and curse, all because I didn't go the way most are comfortable with, that most understand. And what people don't understand usually scares them." She looked at him, then away. The charmingly careless man who chuckled at her temper had a line of steel running through him. It wouldn't be wise, she mused, to forget it. "I know that. I live with that. So why don't we just consider ourselves 2 misfits and see where that takes us?" "I don't know what you're talking about. No, Lavelle's a misfit in progress." "You think that because I've yet to bore you senseless with the wonders of organic farming and the beauty of green cotton." Casually, he lifted her hand, kissed the back of it. "But I will, as I haven't had a new victim in months. Tell you what, you go on home. I need to clean up some. I'll come by and get you in about an hour." "I have things to do." "God knows there isn't a day goes by there aren't things to do." He opened her car door. "I'll be by in an hour," he told her as she slid behind the wheel. "And Tori, just so there's no confusion, this is a date." He closed the door then, tucking his hands in his pockets, strolled over to his truck. 10. "Oh, don't be mean, Kate. I'm just asking one little favor." Faith stretched out across her brother's bed, her chin on her fists, and aimed her most winsome look. She'd developed the habit of coming into his room for company after Hope had died and being alone was unbearable. Now she most often dropped in when she wanted something. They both knew it, and he didn't seem to mind. "You're wasting those eyes on me." Stripped to the waist, his hair still damp from the shower, Cade pulled a fresh shirt from his closet. "I'm using the car tonight." "You can use it any time." She tried to pout. "That's right, I can, and I'm using it tonight." He gave her the smug smile reserved for irritating siblings. "I'm the one who did the marketing for the food you stuffed in your mouth." She scrambled up to kneel on the bed. "And went to the dry cleaners to pick up your stupid clothes, and all I'm asking is to borrow your damn car for one evening, but you're too selfish." He slipped on his shirt, began to button it with that same satisfied smile on his face. "And your point would be—" "I hate you." She yanked up a pillow, heaved it, and missed by a good 1.5 feet. She'd never had decent aim. "I hope you wreck the goddamn car and end up trapped in a heap of twisting, burning metal." The next pillow sailed over his head. He didn't even bother to duck. "I hope glass gets in your eyes and you go blind, and if you do, I'll laugh when you walk into walls." He turned away from her, a deliberate and calculated insult. Well then, I guess you won't want to borrow what's left of the car tomorrow night. I want it now. Faith, my treasure. He tucked the shirt in, picked up his watch from the bureau. You want everything now. Unable to resist, he picked up the keys and dangled them. But you can't have it. She screamed a primal war cry and launched herself off the bed. He could have sidestepped, but it was more entertaining to brace and catch her arms before she could use those pretty lethal nails on his face. Besides, if he'd nipped out of her way, she'd have plowed straight, blind with temper, into his dresser. You're going to hurt yourself, he warned, dancing with her as he held her trembling arms high. No, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to rip your eyes right out of your head. You got a real obsession with me going blind tonight. You rip my eyes out, how can I see how pretty you are? Let me go, you bastard. Fight like a man. If I fought like a man, I'd just cold cock you and be done with it. To infuriate her, he leaned down to give her a quick kiss. It'd take less energy. She slumped, eyes tearing up in defeat. Oh, just let go. I don't want your ugly old car anyway. Those won't work either. Tears come too easy to you. But he kissed her cheek. You can have the car tomorrow, all day and half the night if you want. He gave her arms an affectionate squeeze, started to step back, and saw stars when she kicked his shin. God damn it, Jesus Christ. He shoved her aside, tried to pace off the pain. You sneaky bitch. Be glad I didn't go with my first instinct and use my knee. It was a near thing. When he leaned over to rub at the sting, she made a leap for the keys still in his hand. She nearly had them, then he pivoted and her forward motion shot her past him and down onto the floor with a thud. Kincaid! Faith Ellen! The voice was a whip snapping on satin. Margaret stood in the doorway, body rigid, face pale. Instantly all movement stopped. Mama, Cade cleared his throat. I could hear the shouting and the swearing all the way downstairs, as could Judge Purcell, whom I'm entertaining this evening, as could Lila and the daymaid and the young man who's just come to take her home. She waited a full beat for the weight of the impropriety to lie heavy on the shoulders of her children. Perhaps you feel this sort of behavior is acceptable, but I do not. And I do not wish to have guests, servants, and strangers come to believe that I have raised two hyenas in this house. I apologize. Make him apologize to me, Faith demanded, sulking as she rubbed her jarred elbow. He pushed me down. I certainly did not. You tripped over your own feet. He was being cruel and unreasonable. She had one shot left, Faith calculated, and meant to take it. All I did was ask, and asked politely to borrow his car for the evening, and he started calling me names and pushing me around. She winced, gingerly touching her arm. I have bruises. I suspect there was more than a little provocation, but there is no excuse for laying your hands on your sister. No, ma'am. Kate acknowledged this with a stiff nod and the regret that a foolish interlude could be pressed into such cold, implacable lines. You're right on both counts. I apologize. Very well. Margaret shifted her gaze to Faith's. Cade's property is his to use or lend as he pleases. Now let that be an end to it. I just want to get out of this house for a few hours. Temper spite spilling out of her mouth. He can use the truck just as easy as anything else. All he wants to do is drive someplace dark and quiet so he can grope Tory Bodine. That's pretty talk, Faith, Cade murmured. Very attractive. Well, it's true. Everyone in town knows the two of you are at each other. Margaret took 2 steps forward before her controls snapped back. Do you intend to see Victoria Bodine tonight? Yes. Could you be unaware of my feelings about her? No, Mama, I'm not unaware of them. Obviously, those feelings don't matter. The fact that she played a part in your sister's death, the fact that she is a constant reminder of that loss mean nothing to you. I don't blame her for Hope's death. I'm sorry that you do, and sorrier that my friendship with her causes you any pain or distress. Save your sorries, Margaret said coldly. Sorry's nothing but an excuse for poor behavior. You may choose to bring that woman into your life, but you will keep her out of mine. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am. His voice iced in a direct reflection of hers. It's well understood. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps measured and slow. Cade stared after her, wishing he hadn't seen that one quick flash of grief in her eyes, wishing he didn't feel responsible for it. To cut at the guilt, he shot Faith one violent look. Very nice job, as always. Be sure to enjoy your evening. She squeezed her eyes shut as he strode out. There was a hole in her stomach, burned there by her own thoughtlessness. For a moment she indulged herself, sat and rocked. Then she leaped up, dashed toward the stairs, and heard the front door slam. I'm sorry, she murmured, and sat on the landing. I didn't think. I didn't mean it. Don't hate me. She dropped her head on her knees. I already hate myself. I hope you'll pardon the behavior of my children, Gerald. Margaret swept back into the main drawing room where her old friend waited. There would have been no such outbursts in his house when his children lived under his roof, but then he thought his daughters had been raised to behave as ladies at all times. Still, he offered Margaret a sympathetic and affectionate smile. No, Margaret, no need to apologize, just high spirits. He took the glass of sherry she'd set down before going upstairs and offered it back to her. There was music playing on low, Bach, a favorite of both of them. He'd brought roses, as he always did, and Lila had already put them into the baccarat vase on the broad sweep of the piano. The room, with its deep blue divans and old polished wood, was perfect, peaceful, and precisely as Margaret demanded. The piano was rarely played, but kept in tune just the same. It had been her wish that her daughters become accomplished on that instrument, but there she had been disappointed. There were no family photos in this room. Every memento had been carefully selected for how it would fit into the scheme, so that heirlooms blended seamlessly with her own acquisitions. It was not a room where a man would prop his boots on a table, or a child would scatter toys on the rug. High spirits, she repeated. It's kind of you to say so. She paced over to the window, watched Cade's car roar down the drive. Dissatisfaction scratched her skin like wool. I'm afraid it's a great deal more and less than high spirits. Our children grow up, Margaret. Some of them do. He said nothing for a moment. He knew the subject of hope was never an easy one for her, and as he preferred things easy, would let it drift by as if it had never been said. He'd known her for 35 years and had once briefly courted her himself. She had chosen Jasper Lavelle, who had been wealthier and with bluer blood. It hadn't put more than a hitch in Gerald's stride, or so he liked to think. He'd had ambitions even then as a young lawyer. He had married well himself, raised 2 children, and had been comfortably widowed for 5 years. Like his old friend, he preferred his widowed status to marriage, so much less demanding of time and energies. He was a tall and strapping 60 with the dramatic features of enormous black eyebrows that winged up like ruffled feathers on his otherwise dignified square face. He had made the law all the ins and slippery outs of it his life, prospered, and carved out a respected niche in the community. He enjoyed Margaret's company, their discussions of art and literature, and was her usual escort at events and affairs. They had never exchanged more than a cool, sociable kiss on the cheek. For sex, he enjoyed the favors of young prostitutes who exchanged sexual fantasies for cash and remained nameless. He was a staunch Republican, a devout Baptist. He considered his sexual adventures a kind of hobby. After all, he didn't golf. I don't know that I'm good company tonight, Gerald. He was also a creature of habit. It was their night for a quiet dinner at Beau Rêve, a dinner that would be followed by coffee and a pleasant 30 minutes in the gardens. I'm too old a friend for you to worry about that. I suppose I could use a friend. I'm upset, Gerald. Victoria Bodine. I had hoped I could resolve myself to her coming back to Progress, but now I've learned that Cade is seeing her socially. He's a grown man, Margaret. He is my son. She turned back then, her face hard as stone. I won't have it. He nearly sighed. It seems to me that if you press the matter with him, you'll make it, and her, too important. I don't intend to press it with him. No, she knew what needed to be done and would see to it. He should have married your Deborah, Gerald. It was a mutual regret, mild on his part, that made him smile sadly. We might have had grandchildren together. What a thought, Margaret murmured, and decided she could use another sherry. Tori was waiting for him to drive up. She had it all figured out. It always took a bit of time and distance for her to realize Cade had maneuvered her. He did so very smoothly, very quietly, and very skillfully, but it was still maneuvering. She'd been in charge of her life for too long now to allow anyone a turn at the wheel. He was a nice man, and she couldn't deny she enjoyed his company. She was proud of how calm and mature that sounded when she practiced it in front of the mirror, just as she was pleased with the rest of the little speech she intended to make. She was simply too involved with setting up her new business, establishing herself in town, reacquainting herself with the area to put any time or effort into a relationship with him or anyone else. Naturally, she was flattered he was interested in her, but it would be best all around if they simply stepped back now. She hoped they'd continue to be friends, but that was all they could be, now or ever. She scraped her teeth over her bottom lip. She could bring his taste back. She was good at bringing tastes back, even when she didn't want to be. The hot, sweet flavor of the windfall peaches under the twisted old tree by the river outside of town. Bees, drunk on the fermented juice, swarmed the fallen fruit and buzzed cozily. She hadn't expected his taste to be as hot and sweet, or as potent. She hadn't expected to be linked so perfectly with him for that moment, as if he were one of the missing pieces of the puzzle of her life. That was romanticizing the casual, she reminded herself. It was foolish to pretend she hadn't imagined what it would be like to kiss him. She was human, after all. She was normal. But when she imagined it, everything had been rather mild and pleasant and simple. The reality of it hadn't really been a kiss at all, but more of a sample, and she supposed he'd done that on purpose just to intrigue her. Clever of him, she decided. He was a clever man, but it wasn't going to work. She was ready for him now, and her mind was set. There was no temper or embarrassment to blur her senses. She'd walk outside when he pulled up. In that way, she'd block him from coming inside and having any opportunity to confuse the issue again. She'd make her tidy speech, wish him well, then go back inside and close the door, and stay where it was safe. The plan put her at ease again, in control again. So when she heard him drive up, she gave a little sigh of relief. Everything was about to be put back in order again. Then she stepped out, saw his face. He sat in the pretty convertible, his streaked mass of hair already windblown, his hands resting on the wheel. He gave her an easy smile, but behind it she saw anger and frustration. Most of all, she saw bitter unhappiness. No maneuver he could have devised, no plan he could have calculated could have hit her weakness more effectively. "That's one of the things I like best about you, Tori, you're prompt." He got out, started to round the hood to open the passenger door. She didn't touch him. The connection tended to become too close with physical contact. "Tell me what's wrong." "Wrong?" He glanced down, started to make light of it, then the shield went up. He stepped back, went around to his own side as she climbed in. "Do you just crack open a mind and take a peek at what's inside?"